How do you balance,
Mhm.
I suppose, the like? Because I mean, you have a day job as well, right? You work in a games company, if I'm correct.
Yeah, so like for about 12 years now, I've been half time working on the
Mm,
books and then like doing other like commissioned work half time. So I'm the head of story at Portola, which is an AI
yep.
companion. And I basically run narrative engineering and like shaping the behavior and personality and like basically trying to bring a character to life.
Yep.
And
Okay.
so that's what I like. That's half my time, and then the other half of my time is on the books. And it's basically been like I've worked in that like 50-50 way since 2014, which is
Right on.
funny because like when I like at that time when I wrote my first novel, um, I uh, sort of uh, I, I I was working at a venture capital firm, like investing in startups, and I knew that I couldn't do that while releasing like that work was very all-consuming, and so
Yeah.
I couldn't do that and also publish a novel. And so I was like, oh, okay, I want to publish a novel. So I left the firm and published the novel, and then just started doing some projects where I was like building stuff with friends on the side. And I figured that would be like 6 months of my life where my first book came out, and then I would like return and like get a normal job again. And then it's now like yeah, like 12 or 13 years later, and like I still have like that 6 month timeline is just extended because I just like kept writing more books and it somehow
Yeah.
has
Yeah.
worked out with no plan. So that yeah, that's how that goes. But yeah, I mean that's yeah, so yeah, for quite a while now, that's been sort of the balance of my time.
Yeah, I think from my side, I'm relatively lucky because like most of the time I've been either working as a freelancer, so I'm able to sort of balance
Mm.
the different
Mhm.
parts of my work. Um, and also, I think to me at least, writing is more like less of a job and more of like something that I'm doing as a kind of like as the kind of escapism, I suppose, that you talk about in the
Sure.
story. Um, so it doesn't feel so much like work. But I can totally understand if like you're spending a lot of time on that like the actual time management of it certainly becomes a sort of something that you need to think about a bit more than just like casually doing it when you feel like it.
Yeah, well, I mean, I started like my first again, like my first book, it was I just did for fun. It was exactly
Yeah,
what you just described. So there, yeah, and I just feel great. I mean, like one way you could look at it is that basically I've just been able to like carve out more time than most people to support a specific hobby. And like
yeah,
that hobby has turned out to like be very relevant to my career, or you know what I mean?
yeah, yeah.
It's because like the books have worked commercially.
Mm, mm,
But I honestly, for the most part, I still feel the way you do. Like when I'm working on a new book, it's just I write the book I want to read rather than like I don't know, like trying to like I don't sign contracts in advance with publishing houses because I don't
yeah,
want to like be under contract for a book that
mm,
then I have to perform on according to their standard. So like they're just like different authors approach their work differently, and I think that probably the way I approach my work is maybe more similar to you and how you approach your writing than necessarily all the median author.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I think for me also there's a bit of a difference because a difference for like my creative writing versus other kinds of writing.
Mm,
Because I mean, before I currently work as like a geospatial analyst, but before that, I worked as a journalist.
mm,
And so I did a lot of writing, but it was, very sort of I I wouldn't say exactly like it wasn't technical writing so much as it was very factual writing or very structured writing. And it was very much about the sort of process of gathering information, synthesizing it, and producing like a product, which is like, I don't know, an article of certain length. And
mhm.
that's a kind of very different process to the creative process of writing a story. Um, so I think that, it's there's many different there's many different ways that you can go about this, but I think any fiction writer really has to find some way to preserve that part of it that makes it a creative
Mm.
process still. Um, yeah, no, and in some ways, like I mean, I'm going this way with the discussion here because I think a lot of what Ensorcelled is about is these ideas of how we make stories why we
Mhm.
make stories, and like at our sort of aims in doing so, and the sort of creativity that is required in order to do that, and how that can be rewarding, and also what it demands of us. Uh,
Yeah,
would you?
I oh, sorry. Yeah.
No, I was just gonna ask, like, would you say they're the general ideas of some of the things that you were trying to get across with the story there?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Like, I think that in some ways, every novel is really about writing a novel, right?
Yeah,
Like you go on a journey as a writer in the project that is in some ways a reflection of like what the protagonist is going through, just basically because your emotional state bleeds through, right? Like like
yeah, yeah,
into the prose. And so I think that's absolutely the case. And yeah, I really wanted with Ensorcelled sort of like in a couple different ways, like explicit ways in the story, but also just implicitly to try to be make it about storytelling
yeah,
and like what that means to me and like what it feels like and inviting people into it and so yeah, no, that's absolutely the case. Um and yeah, I mean, I also, um I also do writing in my other, like I clearly write in my like head of story role. And that feels very different, right?
yeah,
Like that feels like I am trying to like there are like like the way it feels to me is there's this thing I'm building with other people, and like how can I like maximize my contribution to our shared vision, right? And like a lot of times that is not like this very that it can be very different from like what is the story I want to tell or the thing that I want to like personally like bring into the world. And so I really appreciate that balance. Like I feel like you were describing what it feels like to be a journalist. There's probably like unique feelings that you get from doing that too, right? Which are also
yeah,
cool. Like I mean, I really appreciate reading good journalism where someone has like rigorously like researched the topic and is able to bring me into it with a unique vantage I wouldn't otherwise have. But I think that on the creative writing front, like the way that I think about it is that like the writer is the material, right? It's like everything you've ever read, everything you've ever experienced, like everything you've ever imagined about other people's experience, that those are the ingredients you have to work with as you cook up a story. And so yeah, I think that's a really yeah, I mean, it's a really insightful point. A couple of the things that I was thinking about like while working on it were there's do you know the Prince of Persia, like that like 80s computer game?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So Jordan Mechner, who like wrote or who created that game,
Mhm.
and that it was like a very like it was very much like this like now AAA games are like these huge
Yeah,
enterprises, right? But like at that time he basically made it by himself. And Stripe Press recently a few years ago like came out with a book that just collated his journal entries while he was working on that project, like from that time in his life. And it's just this really beautiful, like, window into like creative process. Like, even if you have no interest in games, you've never played that game, if you're interested in making things, it's a really like intimate and special view into that because so often you get a memoir after the fact, right? Like, oh, this is what it felt like to make X. But this is in the moment, right? He's like writing these little sort of notes as he's building it. And I found it to be really special to read. And so like that was one of the things that was on my mind writing Ensorcelled of like, okay, like that provided this window into like what it feels like to make something you care, you're proud of for people you care about. And I wanted that feeling to sort of come into this story.
yeah, yeah. That makes complete sense. You so you talked about how basically, so like many stories, or in fact every story probably is about like writing stories, and even in Soul Cell itself is framed as a story that is being told, I believe, to the protagonist's grandchildren, or effectively. while that is the sort of like audience within the book, I'm interested in knowing
Mhm.
who was your intended audience for this story as a whole,
Oh God.
if anyone.
Yeah. So my sort of philosophy of approaching new novels is uh, uh, like I just write the book I want to read.
Mm,
And so in that sense, like I'm always my first audience, or at least like the audience I have in mind is like,
mm,
what is the book I'd want to read? And like that's been the case for my very first novel, like up through Ensorcelled. Um, and so like that's what I was thinking about when I was writing it, right? But there's this transition that happens probably for all authors, but certainly for me, where you sort of you write the story and then or I wrote Ensorcelled. Then I tried to make it the best it could be, right? Like I revised and revised and revised and revised. And I solicited notes from, early readers and that, basically just like gave me fodder for further revision. But at a certain point, you just sort of have to make the call of this is what I want this to be, right? Like this is
yeah.
sort of ready to share more widely. And at that
Mm,
point, you sort of transition from being a writer to being a publisher. And I think
yeah.
that this is actually true of all authors, even if they, like, regardless of the publishing path they choose for their work, right? Like, even if you're even if you've pre-sold a contract to Random House, like you're still making that's still your publishing strategy for your book, right? And so you still have to make that mental switch of like, okay, I've made this thing, now how do I bring it to the right people?
Yeah.
And that's it for me. It's at that sort of transition point when I start thinking about audience, when I start thinking about like readership. And I'll be frank with you, like I had a lot of doubts at that point about Ensorcelled because it was such a personal story. It was such an intimate story. Uh, uh, like my previous books are near future thrillers. They're like speculative
Mm.
thrillers. And um, this is like not the same genre. Like not,
Yeah, actually, that was one question I was going to ask. Like, as
yeah.
your previous books have all been, yeah, in the sort of science fiction sort of direction. This one, I'd say more, if you were going to give it a genre, it might be like magical realism or something like this.
I
Um,
think you're absolutely right. And I actually, okay, so all my books have suffered from the, like on the publishing side, all of my
yeah,
books have suffered from or like uh they are hard to market
yeah,
because they are all sort of like cross genre. They're all like, like they
uh,
incorporate like these different tropes rather than being like like even my science fiction work, they're not space opera. They're not,
mm,
like they're sort of like if either of you have read like William Gibson or Neil Stephenson,
yeah,
where it's like, okay, they're a thriller, but they have these technology elements, but like they're also sort of upmarket or like they have like
mm,
more character depth than like a typical like near future thriller you might pick up at an airport bookstore. So
yeah,
there's and because of that, they're like pretty hard to market because you're sort of like blending all this stuff. It's hard to be like on the nose. This is the next like Gone Girl or like something like that. And so
yeah, yeah,
like my publishers have always like struggled with that, and I have struggled with that in terms of like the marketing of them. Now, the flip side is that that's exactly what I want to read. So I think that like the people who read my books really love them, but they're not as obvious on how to like really like spread the word on, right?
yeah,
And
yeah,
Ensorcelled was like that times 100. Like it's it is quite different. Like you said, it's like if you were to put it in a genre, it'd probably be magical realism, but it's certainly not like Gabriel Garcia Marquez, right? So
mm,
yeah, it's like this interesting thing. And then in addition to that, the manuscript was, it's 12,000 words. It's a novella. And I remember like editing the manuscript and thinking like, I don't like, how should I publish? Should I just like publish this on my Substack? You know, like
mm.
you know, I talked to Audible. They have like an Audible Originals. If I don't know if you guys
Yeah, yeah,
use Audible, but it's like they do these like shorter stories. And like I talked to Steve over at Audible about it, and you know, he was like, but he actually his response was like, "Oh my God, I love this story, and we don't know how to market it because like it's not like a murder mystery or a space, you know, right?"
yeah, yeah.
And so I was struggling at that point. I was like, I honestly am not sure. Like, should I do this as a book? Like, what is the right shape for the package for this story?
Mhm.
And then I talked to my friend Peter Noel, and Peter is just an incredible designer. He's one of these like weird autodidacts who he's like designed things for Apple and also designed things for like, you know, the interior juice bars of a cafe in San Francisco, or, you know, like physical, digital, just like all over the place.
Yeah,
And I was like, he has the kind of like weird talent and vision where like this feels like the kind of weird project that like that it might like click with him. And so we talked about it. He read the manuscript and he was like, "Oh yeah, like I love this. I want to do it." And so he started working on designs for turning it into a book. And I personally, I've always been I have like an unreasonable affection for small books. Like I really love you know, like Claire Keegan, like small things like these, or Foster. If you're a sci-fi fan, like this is Amal Al-Matar and Max Gladstone's "This is how you use the Time War. This is how you lose the Time War." Even like Murderbot, right? Like
yeah.
just these short, tight stories I've
Yeah.
always really, really enjoyed. And I think that one of the reasons I've enjoyed them, so I enjoy them so much in this cultural moment, is that I sort of feel like the general trend in storytelling is the opposite. Like, especially with like the sort of golden age of streaming, you went from
Mm.
screenwriters having to write these tight 2 hour movie scripts to
Yeah.
all of the exciting work in screenwriting being these like you don't even know how many seasons you're going to have, so you just never
Mm.
write an ending and you don't have an ending in mind. And I feel like that loose, sort of like expansive storytelling I've experienced both in prose and on the screen in ways that frankly like I just feel like people are getting lazy like with
Yeah.
telling stories and like not actually making good on the promises they're making to their audience. And so I
Mm.
think for that reason I've gravitated as a reader towards these like tight like like tight stories that still bring you on a full arc where you like feel like you've gone through something, but it was
Mm.
like there wasn't a word out of place, right? And so I that was resonating with me internally. And then Peter worked up like the first prototype, basically, like the first
Mm.
mock, and the printer shipped it to me. And I remember like opening the package from the printer and like taking it out and holding it in my hand. But let me see. Do I actually have it? Oh yeah. Okay. So this is like before there was even a cover design. This is literally like the first mock
Yeah.
that came from the printer. And when I like held it in my hands and started like looking through it, I was like, this is what we want. Like there's something really special here. Um, and and so I went from this like, I don't even know if this is gonna work at all, to like, wow, not only is this gonna work, but this gets me like I want to write more books like this, like almost like, you know, like more of these like tiny, tight, like really cool
Yeah.
things where when you hold it in your hand, it just feels like special and unique. Yeah.
Yeah. I think
So,
it's
yeah.
funny you say that because like I mean one of the what is it, topics I suppose is, or themes in stories that like I generally feel is never done well is time travel. But there's a single novel which I've liked that does time travel well, and it's a novella by Alastair Reynolds called Frostbite. Um,
Oh,
and
I haven't read
it's
it. Okay. I'm going to look it up
incredibly
now.
well structured. It's very
Okay.
well paced. It's like very fast, but it's like it handles all the threads kind of perfectly. And it's really the only sort of novel I've read that does that, like uses time travel that actually you don't leave it think you don't
Mm.
finish it thinking, that doesn't make sense. That's like a sort of bootstrap paradox or something like that, you know.
Totally.
Um, but I think it's because it's in this like shorter novella form that it did, like, in some ways the tighter structure of it forces you to be really, I imagine it would have forced the author to be very sort of strategic about how they plot everything out. Um,
I
yeah.
think you're absolutely right. I think that, I think a lot about both in this work and like when working on like creative commission projects, like how the format you're working in influences the work itself. And I
Mhm.
think that's very true in books, right? Like there is something super special that I absolutely love about one like a doorstopper of a novel where you're just sort of fully immersed in this world and these characters for like a really long time. Like there's no real other form, like narrative form that can do
Mhm.
that, right? Like I think that's really special. And I think that yeah, these tight novella like length stories do something different that's really fun. And like I think a lot about like Borges. I don't know if you've read his short fiction, but Jorge Luis Borges is like this famous Argentinian writer. He
Mhm.
wrote in like the 30s and 40s and 50s. And interestingly, like if you like look him up on Wikipedia or something, he's like a giant of South American literature. So he's like very famous within the literary world, but like his
Mhm.
stories are like totally mind-bending sci-fi. They just have never been like categorized that way, right? They're
Yeah.
like really weird and like thought-provoking. And his stories like I think are very good examples of this. Like they're actually short stories, so like they're not really fully novella length, but they are super tight and like idea driven in a way that works really well like in that length. And like actually even in other genres like the James Bond novels by Ian
Mhm.
Fleming, like the first couple book, I think the first James Bond novel is like 40,000 words, which is like basically a long novella.
Yeah.
And like if you pitched a 40,000 word spy thriller to most publishers today, like you'd just be turned down based on length, right?
Yeah.
Like because like they expect it to be double that. And I've actually experienced that. I had a book that was like a spy thriller that like when my agent was like, oh, like can you like basically double the length of this book? And I was like, no, like this is the story, right? Um, but I think there is something really special about that like novella length. And per your point, I actually think one thing it can do really well is ideas, right? That like with time travel, like I feel like that's where the author starts to lose the threads as it gets too
Yeah.
big and
Exactly.
messy.
Exactly.
But like if it's like in that right sphere where you can sort of like keep it all together, it's this really special sort of
Yeah.
crystalline structure that works.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I love it. I've really enjoyed working in that form and yeah, I want to do more of it. And I also like love reading that form. And I hope that like I feel like in the past few years it started to like become more of a thing again culturally. Like there have been like on the sort of like lit fiction side, again, you've had things like Claire Keegan winning big awards for novels that are like 60 or 70 pages.
Mhm.
And you have genre hits that are kind of like Murderbot, that's like now an Apple TV series, right? Like
Yeah.
I think those kind of things like help sort of like expose audiences to those relative strengths of these different formats and create more space for like people to try new things. So I've really enjoyed it as a writer and a reader, and I hope others do too.
I think connecting to that sort of point of about like sort of the novel's length and so on and so forth. One thing I did notice is that despite the short length of Ensorcelled, the narrator, and I suppose you as the writer, spend a lot of time describing things as you and in quite like in a lot of extreme detail in many cases. And the narrator themselves is, they sketch things, so that's sort of an activity that requires you to, I suppose, observe a lot of detail about the world around you. Was that, I mean, I presume that was an intentional choice, and what was sort of your idea that you were trying to get across by focusing so much on the descriptions and what they were seeing, or the characters were seeing.
Yeah, so that actually sort of goes all the way back to one of the sort of core themes of the story. So I wrote Ensorcelled with a newborn. Like we had our first son was just born, and so I was like sleep deprived and like the rough draft when I was like starting to
Yeah,
work on it. Like it was during that time. And one thing that I noticed with my son is he's a newborn. Like literally the first time he sees a carpet, it's like amazing, right? There have been all those studies out of UC Berkeley about how effectively like uh, young children, like newborns through toddler age, like like the way that their brains work are like is not too dissimilar from the way that like adult brains work on LSD, right? So like,
that was another question that I was going to ask, because the way
okay,
that you described things in this book very much reminded me of the way that people perceive things when they're on hallucinogens. Or and
sure,
immediately afterwards as well. This feeling of like, oh wow, there's so much of the world that I just haven't been noticing, and that's just been
yeah,
slipping me
yeah.
by.
Yeah, absolutely. So when my son was born and he was, whatever, 6 months old, I'd be hanging out with him in the living room and, and I'd notice, and then I'd like get a text or something. So I'd pull out my phone and I'd check my phone and I'd see him look at me looking at my phone. And it really made me like hyper aware of when I was using my phone in his presence, right? Because he was so overwhelmed with awe at things like the carpet or whatever, like all of
Yeah,
this like brand new physical reality that he had just been born into. And when I look at my phone, I look through my phone, right? Like I'm actually looking basically at the internet uh,
yeah,
through my phone. The phone is just this window into the internet. But when he looks at me looking at my phone, he's looking at me looking at like a gray rectangle, right? And he's
yeah,
like, that's literally the most boring thing you could look at in reality. Like, what are you doing? Right? Like, this is how me imagining him, right?
yeah, yeah,
And so, like, I sort of really started noticing that a lot. And so I became much more sensitive to my own use of my phone. And basically, much more sensitive to like taking ownership of my own attention, right? Like investing my attention with intention.
yeah,
And
yeah,
that really came to inform this whole story, right? That it's about Tam, like the main character, almost like rewilding his attention, right? That's the title of
mm,
our little
yeah,
discussion. Um, and because of that, like I thought a lot about what does attention mean? What does it feel like? How do you invest it? Like what is attention? And like that is like that's how it comes through in the story. And I think that, as a writer, like one thing, like when you're writing fiction, as you know, as a creative writer, um, the often the challenge is what not to say, right? Because
yeah,
I mean, if you think about like I don't know, it's like if you think about okay, I'm telling a story about this character, there are all these events happening. Like, do you show them brushing their teeth in the morning? Do you show, or like, do you describe everything you can think of in their immediate proximity? Like, of course not, right? Like, in fact, like literally every word it like is a creative choice that is going to change the nature of the story. And so what the character pays attention to tells you who they are, right? Like it's just like everything they say tells you who they are indirectly. And so I think that I was really focused on thinking about that in my own life, and that really came through in the story. And like you're right, there are a lot of these like very hyper detailed descriptions of like very like sort of specific things throughout the book, and that sort of like I really think that that's a like I think maybe if you were in like a writing seminar or something, they'd be like, "Oh yeah, look at this exposition," and I'm like, "Yeah, it's sort of exposition, like it is description, but really, it's giving you a window into character, and like that's the point, right?"
Mm,
And so, and like frankly, I think that's true in life, not just in novels, right? Like what you pay attention to shapes who you are. And so, an easy way to describe who you are is to take a look at what you pay attention to. And so that's why maybe that's really sort of the dials are turned up on that in this
mm.
particular story.
And I think like continuing on that point, there's what you include and then what you don't include. And I think some of the things that you didn't include here are also very interesting. As far as I can remember, you never even actually state the gender of the protagonist. It's implied heavily they're male because I mean
Mm.
they get
Mhm.
married to a female later on and have kids with them, but that you only find that out at the very end. Um, and theoretically,
Yeah.
they could even adopt kids or something like that. So, uh, was that an intentional choice? I presume, like,
Uh, well, I think it's actually more interesting that I literally have not even thought about that until right now. So that's really fascinating. But yeah, like the protagonist's gender had nothing to do with this story, right?
yeah, exactly.
And so I didn't spend any time at all thinking about it. And I think it could be actually read differently, and I find that like differently than I would have assumed. And I find that totally delightful. Like that's
Yeah.
awesome.
Because I was wondering if you were trying to write it sort of as a blank canvas almost, where like
Hmm.
anyone could project themselves onto the protagonist.
Yeah, so I think that there are a couple things. I don't know if I have a direct answer to that question, but like a couple things that sparks for me. Uh, One is that writers pay attention to different things, right? And I'm a big believer that good writing is about whatever the writer is obsessed with, right? So I there's actually what is it called? Dan Simmons wrote Hyperion. Have you heard of
Mm,
this sci-fi book?
yeah.
Have you either of you read it? Or
I've
yeah,
read
you've
it
read
like
it?
if like a long
Like
time
a long
ago.
time
So
ago. Okay.
yeah,
Okay, so this is a good like illustrative example. So I loved Hyperion when I read it also many years ago.
yeah,
More recently, I read the sequel,
mm,
and in the sequel, I got two-thirds of the way through and quit.
mm,
And the reason why is that as I was reading it, I was like, oh my God, all of the actually the description, like the description, the exposition, the ideas, so much of it was amazing. I was just like, man, Dan Simmons is so good at that part of craft. He clearly cares so much about the ideas in the story, about like, yeah, the description of the story. But the thing I just couldn't handle was the dialogue. Like he'd even give really uh he'd give really wonderful windows into the character's internal psychology in and so like and I thought they were like they actually had like surprising depth. I was like real I really enjoyed that. But the minute the characters opened their mouths and said something, it was like to me it was so grating. It was like this is the dumbest dialogue I could imagine, but like embedded in all of these other things which are totally awesome, right? And it got to a point where I want like it tripped me up so much as a reader that I just couldn't continue. And I really
mm,
wished that I could like Control F for dialogue tags and just delete all the dialogue in the manuscript, you know? Like if it had done that, I'd be like, this would be a masterpiece if you just like had no dialogue. Like it's so you don't
yeah,
even forget the dialogue. Just and I
yeah,
feel
yeah.
like I mean I can't speak, I've never met Dan, I can't speak for him. And like for anyone listening, like I've really enjoyed his work. So I'm not trying to throw shade here, but like I just feel like he cares so much about ideas. He cares so much about character and their psychology. He cares about all of these things. And I feel like he must just not care that much about like how people talk, right?
Mm,
And And so it just comes across like it's just at a completely different level of quality standard than like the rest of the work. And so with like as a writer, I try to lean into that where I'm like, okay, what is it that like really fascinates me in this story, in this context? And I'm going to try to like only write about that and skip everything else, which is hard to do, but like I that's my aspiration. And so like uh you'll notice that in this story, and this is actually true in probably most of my work, um, like the physical description of characters is extremely spare, right?
Mm,
Like I just like when you if you ask me to describe one of my friends in my real life, like I would tell you a lot about like their origin story, like what they're like how they think, like how they make me feel, like what they wear and like what they look like is just like not that interesting to me. And so I probably wouldn't like that. I would never lead with that. And
mm,
because I wouldn't lead with that describing a friend to you, I don't lead with that when I'm describing a character. And it's just not that important to me. So I think that's half of it. And I think the other half of it is actually point of view. Um, this is a story told in first person, and I've written novels both in like uh, like in first person and in third person, and like multiple characters in third person. And the interesting thing about point of view is that it's like as a writer, it's basically like you're using different tools, right? And you can access like you can do if like the different perspectives make certain things a lot easier or more natural, and certain things more technically challenging as a writer. So, as an example, if you're writing like third person limited, meaning like you are writing about a single, like a character in third person, and we can see their thoughts, but we can't see other characters' thoughts, right? It's like just from that one point of view. Um, that is really easy to do action in, right? It feels really natural to be like, and then he did this or she did that, right? Like it comes very naturally. Whereas if you're writing a lot of like interiority, like a lot of like thoughts and feelings directly, it's you can do it, and like writers can do it really well. It just takes a lot more uh sort of like technique to make the prose flow. Um, Whereas on the flip side, if you're writing first person, I actually think that it's first person, it's pretty challenging to do action in a way that's really compelling because just having I did this, I did it just doesn't like
yeah.
flow. So you can again, you can still do it. It's just it takes skill and effort. Whereas something that comes very easily in first person is is transitioning seamlessly between interiority and exteriority. So like going from thoughts to experience and back and forth and memory and anticipation and like all of that is very easy. And I think that this is obvious when you think about how most blog posts are written in first person, and they have that like personal essay. I'm telling you about my childhood as I'm telling you about the car accident I was just in, as I'm telling you about life philosophy, right? It's sort of just like all it's easy to mash those up. And so because this is written in first person, it has a lot of I use those elements a lot because it's fun. It's like those are fun to work with in first person. Whereas like someone thinking a lot about their own appearance in first person, you can do it and like it would tell you a lot about the character, right? Like if that's what they paid attention to, but that's not something that like really like you like that would take effort to do well, and wasn't something that I felt like was important for this particular protagonist.
Mm. I think one kind of unintentional effect of this being in the first person, also in general, because of the sort of genre and style of it, was, and then I don't know whether this was an intentional thing that you did, but for the 2/3 of the book, or like at least like until like 2/3 of the way through the book, I suspected that Lenny was a figment of the narrator's imagination,
Oh
and
yeah.
that there was going to be a twist where basically she wasn't either real or she was something else. Um, and I thought that's the direction you were going in. And I think some of that is because I'm pretty conditioned to sort of expect a twist like this. Also, like maybe I read too much in like psychological thriller
Mhm.
genres that use this kind of devices a lot. But that was certainly where my mind was going. And then I was surprised then when that wasn't the case.
That's really cool because actually I was being interviewed for a podcast last week, and the host said the exact same thing. And I was like, oh wow, like I had never that was never even in my mind, like using that, like I've used that element in other stories, but like that was not like part of like what I was imagining for Lenny. But I think it's really fascinating that like clearly you like readers are taking that from the story, which I actually think like I think it's super cool. What I told the host on that podcast is I loved hearing that from readers because another major theme in this story is like the relationship between like imagination and fictional worlds and like narrative and reality, right? So like having unintentionally like tripped that trope, I feel like is as a writer is like very like satisfying for me to hear. But yeah.
Yeah, I think the thing that set me down in that direction was that her character comes across as very much of like in some way like not sexually but like kind of like an adolescent fantasy sort of thing in
Yeah.
the sense of that like
Yeah.
she's inexplicably interested in the main character.
Hmm.
And also she seems much cooler than him and much more knowledgeable and like much more courageous
Totally.
and all these sort of things, and there's no obvious reason why she wants to spend time with the main character. And I
Hmm.
think that is what made me think, that there's something like if something can't easily be explained in the world of the story, then I
Sure.
assume that it's foregrounding for something else, rather
Yeah.
than assuming that good things can happen. Maybe I'm too pessimistic.
No, 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 no. I think that's really insightful. Yeah, I have actually a dear close friend who was like I think definitely was an influence on Lenny's character, and she has this quality that is uh, she, she has the like the quality that Lenny shares of like uh extreme direct, like just saying exactly what she's thinking, and also like seeing the world in a very, very specific and like unique way, right? Like paying a lot of attention things that like first principles is the wrong term to use here, but just that it's like she looks at what's there rather
Yes.
than looking at like what she expects to be there.
Mhm.
And I think that like that's a quality about her that is very charismatic, right?
Yeah.
It's like it's really fun to talk to her for those reasons. And I feel like that was really fun to sort of play with. Like, I mean, Lenny is not modeled directly on her, but that is like
Yeah.
one quality that really like I think I felt a lot like working on Lenny. I mean, and I also think that one thing that my friend does, which I really admire and I've tried to emulate, is she is extremely good at like uh, giving specific praise to friends and to basically just to like people, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, like first of all, everyone loves to hear how awesome they are, right?
Yeah.
But it feels really different when you're like, oh, Dimitri, like you're so smart or whatever, whatever, like just some generic thing. And something that she's really good at, it's just as she's very good at seeing the world for what it is. She's very good at sort of seeing people for who they are. And so
Mhm.
she'll like mention something in passing, and suddenly you think about it later, and you're like, wow, you're like really right about that, about our mutual friend. And I had never thought about it in that way,
Yeah.
like something like that. And so she pays this very direct and intentional attention to people. And so that's how I saw Lenny's interest in the protagonist growing, right? It's like
Mm,
he's the only other kid on the trip, and he's enigmatic,
yeah,
and she wants to figure him out.
yeah.
And that's where that sort of came from for me. But you're absolutely right. That also would have been a very effective setup for her to be a figment of his imagination.
Yeah, I mean, it's like I also like things that subvert expectations too. So
Sure.
as you said, it is a bit of a trope. So in some ways, it's better to have subverted it. That was arguably more surprising because
Sure.
I don't know. I'm one of those people who tries to like guess the twist in the story before it happens. And so sometimes it's better. Actually, one of the things that I very much like in stories that are like courageous enough to do this is stories that have the bad guys win.
Yeah,
It's
sure.
so rare. It's like the
Yeah.
rarest thing. Um, like season two of True Detective did this, and everyone hated it, but I loved it for that exact reason.
That's awesome.
Um, and it's so rare, but it's like it's so refreshing when it does when someone actually does this because it's like it's just not done, and it
Mhm.
subverts all your expectations of the novel. So in some ways, yeah, no, I also very much enjoy these kind of subversions of these kind of tropes as well. One, yeah, like I mean, yeah, you mentioned that Lenny was based on a friend of yours. I'm interested in knowing how much else of this story was autobiographical. Because in like, I mean, the main character is from the Bay Area where you're from. They go on to live to work in a games company like you do, and they talk a lot about writing stories and sort of things. So I'm wondering, is this about your childhood?
Um, It's not about my childhood, but there is a lot from my life in this story, and I think it is
Mhm.
unusually personal compared to my other novels as well.
Yeah.
So one very direct example is that every summer we do a camping trip with a big group of friends to a secret lake in the backcountries of the Sierras, which are, the mountains here in like Eastern
Yeah.
California, and this story was like very much inspired by that place, by how magic those experiences have been, like both personally and to share with people I love. And so, like a lot of the story is inspired by the experiences of going on those trips, but that's as an adult, right? And like that's
Mhm.
seeing, and like now that's seeing like our kids do that together every year, right? And like so yeah, very autobiographical in that sense. Again, I really like I grew up in California. I love California. Like it's a really magical place that I'm grateful to live in. I mean, there are many other magical places in the world too. It just this happens to be the one where I live. Um, and I like writing about it basically just because, like I said, I think writing about things you're obsessed with is a real strength as a writer. And so this was fun to sort of like try to bring that to life. And I think that like one of the things I appreciate, especially about the Bay Area, is we actually started talking about this before we even started, just sort of the proximity that you feel between this sort of like economic dynamism of like people trying to do like weird ambitious things and sort of like technological innovation and wilderness and nature, and you're on this coastline and you have the mountains there, and having those together feels really special. Like when I visit New York City, it's an amazing city, it's super cool. I really enjoy visiting there, but it does not have that quality at all. Like it has other
Yes.
strengths. And so I wanted to try to capture that a little bit in this story, which is why like the Tam is from San Francisco. It's also part of why he is obsessed with sort of games and like technology in a way, but then sort of gets brought to the other side of this spectrum that feels like a spectrum that is very rooted in this physical place, that I really appreciate. And like for many years, I've spent a lot of time in the Sierras. And that's since I was much younger, backpacking with friends and stuff like that. And it does feel really magical. I think that anybody who's spent a significant amount of time immersed in nature knows that feeling. And so my priority as a writer was trying to summon that feeling for readers. And it was just like the fact that it happened to be the Sierras was more fun. for me. It was just like,
Mhm.
yeah, like I have like it's like really grounded in real experience. I also think that like my tendency as a writer, like again, like my other books are much more they're near future, they're sort of speculative, they play with these like what if questions. Often there's like some sort of like technological scenario that's like a big component of what drives the plot. Um, and uh, and I think that like the way I my way into that is not um I don't know like reading white papers and trying to like think about like what does the next 10 years hold, or I don't even
Yeah,
know
yeah,
what that would be. It's like I feel that like the way I approach collecting material or like coming to an idea for a novel is that I see myself more as like a naturalist. Like it's more that I just sort of like try to pay a weird amount of attention to like things in my life, and it happens to be that I live in a place where there are a lot of people who are working on technology, and so like that is what informs those kinds of stories. And frankly, similarly with Ensorcelled, right? Like you mentioned, like gaming and that kind of stuff. Yeah, like that, like a big piece of this is rather than it being like a thought experiment, it's more like I am just trying to pay an unusual amount of attention to the world as I move through it, and then trying to like use those ingredients, use those observations to weave a world in fiction.
yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. One of the other things I have this, that there was a quote that you had within the novel. Let me just try to find it. Um, yeah, where the main character says, "I had learned that you could become so bewitched by a seductive elsewhere that you missed out on ever truly being here, and yet elsewhere was sometimes exactly where you needed to go." And so, I mean, this quote talks about, if I'm understanding it correctly, this sort of inherent dichotomy between the sort of the need to have escapism, but also the need to be present in situations. And it, is that the correct sort of reading of that? And then, secondly, I suppose, what is your philosophy towards that sort of inherent tension there?
Yeah, I really think that's a quote that's probably the thematic heart of the story.
Yeah,
Uh, the way I think about it is sort of this, like I like humans, both in literal stories, like in books and movies, TV series or whatever, games, but also in like things we don't describe as stories, but sort of like that leverage some of the same psychological mechanisms, like scrolling TikTok or whatever.
yeah,
Um, we we spend a lot of time like not being present in our physical reality, right? It's like even right now, like we're talking like across the world, like I'm not, what was it? I'm not paying attention to the carpet, right?
yeah, yeah,
And uh, and um, and so we spend a lot of time in these what are effectively like imaginary worlds, right? Whether that imaginary world is like your Instagram feed or Harry Potter or whatever else. And and I think that it's easy to get lost in that, right? Like it's easy to miss out on a lot of what could otherwise be really powerful and moving experiences in your like in your physical life by spending a lot of your time immersed in these invented fictional worlds. Again, whether it's like a feed or a Netflix series. Um, Now, the flip side of that is that I feel like right now we are living in a moment where there is cultural backlash against that, right? It's like Jonathan hates the anxious generation. Like everybody's talking about like getting off of screens. Um, and I think that there's something interesting there too, because just like whenever you have an argument, people move apart from each other. And I think that there's something odd in sort of just regaling against uh like that whole category of stuff, right? Like
yeah,
touch grass, right? And so I really think that that one of the amazing things about being a human with like the weird brains we have is that we can simulate all of these experiences. We can live in these imaginary worlds. That's so awesome. Um, but if you if you don't have a rich physical life, uh, then I think a lot of the joy gets bled out of the imaginary ones because so much of what makes them exciting is the contrast, right? Like it's powerful because they're different. It's like when you travel, when you go to a new place, yes, it's exciting to explore the new place. You have to figure out how to ask where to go to the bathroom. You have to, like there's, that's exciting. But one of my favorite parts about international travel is returning home, and suddenly you realize like, oh wow, my a lot of my these assumptions I didn't even realize I had about how life works, right? That are now revealed by having gone somewhere else. And I think that that's very true of like spending time elsewhere, like whether that elsewhere is TikTok or a novel or anything else, and spending time like in your wherever your present here and now is with like all of your attention brought to bear on that. And so, and I think that like specifically like when people use the word escapism, like I actually think that that can be like literally helpful. Like we had a dear friend over last night, and he was sharing how uh, him and his fiance like were stuck in a on a train in a tunnel 8 minutes outside of Paris for like 3.5 hours. It's like the train came to they had an emergency stop and they couldn't move the train for like 3.5 hours. And, everyone, like a lot of the other people inside were like, getting very upset, right? I mean, it's obviously not a fun experience. And he felt like he was like both him and his fiance felt like they were about to have panic attacks because it was just like really an uncomfortable environment.
Yeah.
And he started like they like took deep breaths together, and then he's like, I need to like talk, I need to like bring us like out of this situation. So he just like talked to her, and that helped calm both of them, and it took them away from being in the train for a moment, right? It was like about the conversation and what the ideas in the conversation and the stories he was sharing in the conversation, and that literally helped them get from like, oh my God, like we're both like losing it, to just like, okay, like this sucks, but like whatever, like we're gonna be fine. This is just an inconvenience, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so I think that that is very like that's a beautiful thing. And it's funny that usually the word escapism, you didn't use it this way, but it is often used in a sort of in a way that sort of belittles it, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
oh, you just read those books with dragons on the cover, like, like that kind of a vibe. And like, I'm like, why are you like, it's so cool that like you can literally imagine yourself in another place and it is compelling. Like, that's like an amazing part about being human. So we should celebrate that. And I think that like, again, part of what makes that experience powerful is it has this balance, it has this dynamism, it has this contrast with our physical experiences. And I think that if you basically lean too far in either direction, you're sort of missing out on one of the really cool aspects of being human. And so one thing I wanted to capture with that line is you can imagine how easy it would have been to end that sentence before the final clause,
Yes.
right? And I feel like that would have been like the obvious thing to do if we wanted to be if this the theme of this book was going to be touch grass. And but it was really important to me to like not do just that, right? Like because I think that the kinds of readers that are going to enjoy this kind of a weird, unusual, very idiosyncratic story are the kinds of readers who understand that like like in many ways, and like wisdom or intelligence requires holding contradictory ideas in your head at once.
Yeah. Yeah. For sure. I mean, I think from my experience and even in my journey with sort of engaging with writing and writing itself was very much sort of back and forth between those things because I used to, when I was relatively even quite young as a child, I used to read a lot as a form of escapism, and that sort of carried through to, I suppose, my mid-teenage years. And then I almost stopped reading entirely because I sort of developed this idea that, actually that kind of escapism was exactly the wrong thing. I needed to engage completely with the real world, completely with, all of the horrible things in the real world. And so then I got into journalism and worked as a conflict journalist and was going to war zones and this kind of thing, and would be like, no, I have to only focus on like the horribleness. I can't allow myself to escape. That's like cowardly. That's bad of me to do. And then after a while, I realized, okay, no, I'm just going to destroy myself doing this. And since then, I've been much more re-engaging with this kind of escapism
Mm.
and this kind of like, the creative worlds that we can build and the places that aren't here and might not be possible, but are still real within our minds.
I think that's really beautiful. And I think that like the arc you just described in many ways, like that's sort of the arc I was trying to sketch with this kind of a story where you do go like you went from like one to the other to both, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think that sort of thesis, antithesis, synthesis is like a really can be a really powerful like architecture for fiction as well.
Mm-hmm.
Because like I've certainly felt that in my life, right? Or like that in many ways that's what growth feels like. I don't know, right? So yeah, I really appreciate that.
Yeah, and I suppose one final question I had, and Dimitri, you're welcome to ask some questions too if you have any. But one final question that I had was that one other quote was talking about like making games and how you can make games, and he said, "Oh, the answer to that was you put yourself on the hook, you fill the gap in the universe that only you can see." And I'm wondering, what is the gap in the universe that only you can see that you try to fill with your writing, either just for this book or in general?
Oh, well, the irony is, I think that that is like a very interesting question that I feel like is going to maybe have like a disappointingly banal answer, which is that, which is actually where we started. Like, I basically try to write the book I want to read. And so what that means for me is I try to think about myself as a reader first and a writer second, right?
Mm,
I pay a lot of attention to the things I love, to like to taste, basically. Like and I also read in a really like really specific ways. Like I used to be one of those people who like I would feel disappointed in myself if I like didn't finish a book I started. And then I over time learned that it was actually far better to do the opposite for me, where like I will read almost anything. Like if someone I trust recommends something, I don't even care. Fiction, not like literally anything, I will try it. But I will quit in the first paragraph if I don't like connect with it, right? Or I will quit, like I mentioned with the whatever the sequel to Hyperion, two-thirds of the way through, I'll quit like a really long book, like with all that sunk cost. I'll just whatever, like I'm out of here. And so I pay a lot of attention to taste, and then I just sort of like I feel like the way I come to the idea for a new book is like I sort of like want to read a thing. I want to read a thing, and it feels like an itch. And I usually try to seek out books to read that scratch that itch. And often I'm successful. And so that does then that great. The universe has what it needs, right? But sometimes I can't find the thing that scratches that very specific particular itch. And so like my only option is to write it and fill that gap. And I've heard friends who are filmmakers who make games who write or essayists or whatever. Like I'm certainly not alone in that approach. Like I've definitely heard like that is often like that is a common origin story for like creative projects for others as well as for me. Um, but that's sort of how it feels internally to me. So sort of the where Tam lands is in that place, and I think that I guess just to maybe illustrate it with a certain sense of contrast, like there are many alternatives to that, and I don't think that the alternatives are bad, right? And like there are some writers who like who think much more about things like the market or genre expectations or stuff like that, and like that informs their creative decision making. And like I think that's just as legit. Like there's no, that's not a bad thing. It's just that hasn't been what has like moved me to write yet. And I think that for Tam, that's the case too, that he lands in a place where uh, rather than making the kind of game that he wanted to play at the beginning of the story, which was uh, like uh like a very large cultural hit already. He's not trying to emulate that, right? Like when he starts to make his own game, he leans into sort of like the weirdness of his idiosyncratic taste, and then
Mm,
the success that it encounters is due to others sharing his weird taste more than it is due to uh trying to make a hit, right? And so I think that's, yeah, that's where I was trying to get to there. But in many ways, the quote sort of literally just says what I mean.
mm,
So,
mm.
yeah.
Yeah, no, that makes complete sense. Yeah, I mean, it's to me, it's always interesting when authors try something like very different, even when they're like without thinking too much about these kind of market expectations or even what um or even like the sort of expectations of the reader beyond that they're going to have an entertaining story.
Mhm.
I one of sort of my favorite series of novels is actually one that wasn't completed by the author because their publisher dropped them because it was too weird.
Oh,
You,
really?
you you might know. Do you know Mark Z. Danielewski? He's the author of House of Leaves, but he wrote a different series called
No.
The
Okay.
Familiar, and
Okay.
it's in the same sort of magical realism genre. So and in some ways similar to Ensorcelled, but much longer and much weirder and
Cool.
very difficult to get into.
Okay.
But I, for me, for whatever reason, it ticked all the boxes. Like I was completely sold on it. After 5 books and 3,000 pages or something like that, I still had no idea what was going on, but I didn't need to. Um,
Sure.
like it was very weird. I had absolutely no idea what was going on. But to me, it wasn't about the plot. It was
Hmm.
about the feelings that the words came across.
Hmm.
And somehow, like one thing that I think this author is very good at doing is capturing this feeling of, I say, like trepidation, like the idea that when
Hmm.
you when you're like you're turning off the last lights in your house, and then you flip that light switch and everything's dark, and you know that everything's safe, because the lights were just on. But the moment those lights go out, you start to have this feeling, what could be there in the dark? That is the feeling that like this whole series of novels was. Even if it was
Wow.
describing something very uh, um, like mundane. The reason I bring it up is because you're talking about like the creation of games, and there's a very specific scene in this where the main character, who is also a sort of she's a teenage girl in this case, her father works as a games developer, takes
Mm.
her to preview a game that they have under development, and they haven't yet rendered all the assets in the game and so on. So she's playing the game, and there are like the computer has coded for the enemies being there, but they have no like game assets, so she
Yeah,
can't
yeah,
see
yeah.
them, and so she's being hunted down constantly by things she can't see,
Oh,
and just
God.
like randomly getting killed. And but the way the story describes it is in this like beautiful metaphor of like what it's like to be like hunted by your own grief and your own like sorrow. It's about
That's
depression and so on and
beautiful.
so forth.
Yeah.
But yeah, no. So I mean, I do love it when authors really try to explore these kind of like weird concepts or things just out of the norm. And so I definitely thank you for writing this novel. And I yeah, it's a very interesting read, and I hope lots of other people read it too.
Thank you. Yeah, I really appreciate that. That's very kind and generous, and I really appreciate your thoughtful questions. They really, as I said, some of them illuminated aspects of the story I wasn't aware of. So that's always a joy, and that's one of my favorite things about actually like releasing a book is that that has happened with every single one of my books, right? Like readers find things in it that I didn't realize were there in advance. So Yeah, that's really wonderful. And yeah, I hope that other people who appreciate those sort of like like making weird art
Mm,
for weird people. Like I really hope that the right people find this story and also that they feel moved by the story to do more of it themselves because I think that's part of that's part of that sort of like this novel is about writing this novel. And I think that's really the case here. So I'm going to look up the series you just mentioned because that sounds uh, both like it's already creating some anxiety for me, but also really cool.
if you liked House of Leaves, I don't know if you know this
Yeah,
novel.
I
Yeah,
haven't read
it's
it.
uh, it's
Yeah,
it's it's stylistically similar, but the plot, if is different,
sure.
I'd say.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. No, that's very cool. Yeah, and I do think it's interesting because I think that it is like even for folks who go in the other direction and are trying to make something that's more market aware,
Mm,
um, that doesn't always work, right? Like I mean, I always think like, can you imagine like George Lucas pitching you on Star Wars before it became Star Wars, right? Like, okay, nice space wizards, George, right? Like it was just like I think that that's it's not true of everything. They're obviously like Tom Cruise when he makes the next Mission Impossible movie, like, okay,
yeah.
we know that's going to be a hit. But like the reason why you know it's going to be a hit is that it's relying on all these previous hits, like both
Mm,
the previous Mission Impossible movies, but also Tom Cruise himself and like, like all of those things put together. And so and again, like I don't think that any of those are bad, but I do think that there is sometimes I think that people, including myself, often over-index like the relationship between seeking to make a hit and actually making a hit. Whether that hit is your next Substack post or like Instagram reel or novel or movie, right? That like often many of the most beloved sort of creative products that people really connect with, like start in a very weird place
mm,
and then sort of surprise everyone. And I
yeah.
think, frankly, I'm really grateful for that. It makes it hard if you are, trying to release things and make them commercially successful. But I think that like as a culture, we're much better off with that like we're much better off because it is surprisingly challenging to manufacture hits. I think that makes basically culture more interesting.
And I think one of the great things about writing as well is that the barriers to entry for writing are very low, and I think sort of the amount of barriers of entry for any creative product is basically uh, inversely proportional to how creative you can be. It's also why I feel like horror as a genre of film is probably the most creative because it has the lowest barriers of entry. It's very easy to make a low budget horror film, and so you can be incredibly creative and you get some really cool concepts. I mean, a lot of them are trash, but if people are trying new things, and that's the most important part.
I couldn't agree, but I actually think about this a lot. Like I think that's like one of the biggest strengths of books or writing even more generally as a
Yeah,
form is that they are so cheap to produce, right? Like the single largest cost is the author's time,
yeah,
right? And that is extraordinary. Like if you think about like making a movie, like it's like such a different world, right? So you
mm,
have to think how many people you have to convince to put in money to make
yeah,
a movie, right? And
yeah,
not just money, like the expertise, time, energy, like all the rest of it. It's so hard. And so as a result, like you have to make a movie and like you can insert almost anything else here too, to build the building you want to build, to like make the open the restaurant you want to open
yeah,
to like any creative act like uh so much of them the first step is convincing a bunch of other people to agree to make it with you, whether they're making it with you as a producer or by writing a check or by acting in it or by giving you a permit to build the building, right? Like the first step is you have to convince a bunch of other people to make this happen. And writing is one of the few forms where there are very few to none other people that you have to convince in
Mhm.
order to make your vision real. Now, of course, the flip side is like, will anyone care? Right? Like there's so much writing in the world for this reason. So like that doesn't mean that like whatever you write will have a high readership, but it allows you to do things you can't do in any other form. And so I actually think that because that's one of the unique strengths of the format, it's something I try to lean into as a write. Like I try to be weirder than I would if I was building a building or doing these other things where success means convincing other people to get on board a priori.
Mhm.
So yeah, I totally agree, and I think that's one of the real beauties of prose.
Yeah, no, I also, yeah, yeah, I think really yeah, I'm with you on that one for sure. I think we're getting towards sort of the end here in terms of the time that we had allocated. Was there anything else, I suppose, that you wanted to talk about from your side that you don't think that we've already covered with sort of the questions that I've asked, or any sort of parting thoughts or or sort of things you'd like to say about Ensorcelled or just writing in general?
I mean, this has been really delightful and comprehensive. So I don't know. There's nothing that was like in the back of my head that I haven't shared yet. I would just say that like, riffing on what we just sort of mentioned, like it's very cool to write fiction. It's fun, and like I recommend, like it's fun, and like Dimitri, I recommend it if you haven't experimented with it yet. But I also think that uh, like I actually think that like reading is even more magical than writing, right? Like I think like I still that remember that feeling of like being a kid in the library and like hiding in the stacks so my parents couldn't find me to take me home. Like
Yeah,
the fact that we just have like all these imaginary worlds, like the story describes them, right? Like accessible at our fingertips all the time. I just feel like that's such like a marvel of modern life that is sort of underrated. And so, and as a writer, I'm so aware that like writing is just like shapes on a page until a reader brings them to life in their imagination. So like I just say like thank you for reading this story and reading it with so much thought, and also just to like I try to celebrate myself as a reader too. And I just feel like it's such a beautiful thing to be able to explore the world through other people's eyes, which is I think a big part of what makes fiction tick. And so yeah, I'm just grateful for you having read it, and for everyone else who's giving the story a try, and hopefully the right people will connect with it.
great, great. If you didn't have any further questions, Dimitri, we might end it up there. Did you have any questions?
Oh, I wouldn't mind asking some. Yeah,
Yes, by all means, go
I
for it.
mean, you were doing so well as a host. I think you were, just amazed how well you prepared for it, really. So I feel like, like I just the kind of the conversation flow, because
Thanks.
it was just it's just so interesting how it was going. Right. But yeah, thanks. I actually, made a lot of notes and such. So I haven't gotten into writing, but I'm kind of thinking of maybe trying, just as a hobby. And one thing I wanted to ask is, you mentioned a lot about how you like your stories to be tight, right? And you like novellas for the reason that they are tighter than like a massive book, or like like a fantasy series, whatever. So how do you get them to be tight, right? Because just that there isn't, like, if you make a short story, doesn't mean it's tight, right? Like, so how do you go about actually making them tight besides word count?
Yeah, no, okay. So this is a great question, and you're absolutely right. The word length or whatever of a story has nothing to do with whether it is actually loose or tight or whatever, right? So I'll give a nonfiction example that I think is illustrative. When I'm writing a blog post, uh, I always sort of go through this sort of journey where like I have an idea for a blog post, I write a draft of that, and then I realize I'm actually trying to say like five things, and that actually a blog post as a form, I personally think is much better when you say one thing well than when you say five, you're sort of like trying to say five things. And so then I'll realize, wait, this actually maybe should be five blog posts. And so I'm now going to just take one of those things and try to say that, right? So I'll take that apart and I'll just only say one thing. And I basically won't want to publish a blog post until I feel like it says one thing, right? Now, novels are not blog posts, so I'm not saying that it's exactly the same, but I do think that there's a similar dynamic at work where I think that tight writing is the result of the author being like trying to be very self-aware about what they're trying to say, right? What actually is the point, rather than talking, rather than sort of meandering around. And again, like there's nothing wrong with meandering around. I don't think that that's a bad approach. It's just that if you want to write tight, I think the way to write tight is to try to say only the thing that you are only the one thing you're trying to say, and sort of jettisoning everything else. And one thing that I find as useful as a psychological hack as a writer is that if I write a blog post and I have the 5 ideas in it, and then I like take the other ones out and I just write the one, I tell myself that I will write those other ones later as separate blog posts, because then I don't feel like I'm losing material, right? In reality, that very rarely happens. Usually I just publish the one, right? But I do find that to be helpful because like I do feel like if I'm writing something and like I sort of have something I think there are good features of, I hate deleting it. And so I find that useful in fiction too, where like, with Ensorcelled, I actually thought that Ensorcelled, the story as it exists today, was going to basically be like the first section of a much longer novel. And as I was writing it, I realized that everything important that I wanted to include in this story was actually in this first part of what I had imagined to be a much longer story. And so then I just distilled it. I took all of those features that I was planning to hold back and save for later, and instead I like brought them forward and injected them straight into the manuscript.
Wow, that's awesome. Thanks. Actually, super useful. And I guess, yeah, I think I actually had a very similar a question that actually I think I managed to answer at least most of the way, actually. Yeah, because I was like, okay, so on the other hand, okay, novellas, yeah, exactly say. So they are short, but they're not very short, right? So as you're like as you're maybe writing it, is like your idea kind of evolves as you're like mulling it over, as you're like writing like thinking about always about the same thing. So I guess, yeah, like I had a question about like how does this idea evolve and how do you like kind of react and adapt to it? But I guess you can answer this just now, essentially, right? Just being like very aware of how it happens.
Yeah. I mean, like, I think there's sort of like a limited amount of planning that I feel like helps me when I'm writing. It's sort of like you have an idea and you know that that idea is not going to survive contact with the enemy, and contact with the enemy is basically like what shapes the actual end product. And so, once I have like a core idea, I try to like start working on it soon rather than sort of stewing, like just thinking about it a lot for a long time, because I find that actually working out the idea in the writing process is what brings it to life rather than having thought and meticulously planned for it in advance. Other writers have very different approaches, but that's how it works for me.
An approach that I take is if I come up with an idea for a story, I write a short story in that setting to see if I actually feel like there's enough depth to this setting to write like a sort of longer story.
Oh, that's cool. I like that.
I mean, I know quite a few authors do this as well, like, or at least there's a lot of full-length novels that are based on the seed from a short story that they've written at an earlier time. But yeah.
I think Game of Thrones started out as a short story. That first scene.
Oh, really?
Yeah, with the direwolf, I think was George wrote that as a short story and then just sort of continued.
If you have a hard stop as well, now we can finish up.
Let me just double check. Yeah, I have a hard stop in 4 minutes. So at one.
Okay,
yeah.
all right, then
Yeah.
I'll finish up.
Okay.
Thank you very much for coming today and having the chat. I know there wasn't a large audience, but thanks for spending the time talking about your novel. Thanks for writing it, and good luck with the marketing of it and finding an audience for it.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. And Michael, thank you so much for the really thoughtful questions. As I said, they really brought a unique vantage to the story, and this was a lot of fun.
Great.
All
Thanks.
right.
Thanks
All right.
so much.
See you later.